One of the big things about a call center too, or contact center, is that yes, they're taking in lots of questions and they're taking in where people are having issues and problems, but they're also a sales organization. They also have an opportunity to cross sell and upsell. They are having way more sales conversations than the sales team is having at a much different level. So the idea that operationally, sales, marketing, logistics, I mean, you can just go down the list in terms of the importance of all of this data. And the good news is that the AI tools, there seems to be a new AI company popping up for servicing the contact center industry every single day. So it should be getting easier to do this. What is your advice for somebody who's listening right now and saying, oh my gosh, yes, like I fight every day. I have to advocate every day because one of the key KPIs that the board and the C-suite is looking at is how do we reduce costs? And I'm one of the largest costs in the business. So I'm fighting for resources. I'm fighting for my value to the organization. So what you're talking about here is how to scale value to analyze and operationalize it. So voice of the customer operations. So I guess one way to start this conversation out is how do you think about doing that? We want to learn from you're sitting in that chair, you're doing that for your own organization. Like, how do you think about what you do and how you could translate that so that we could all understand it a little bit better?
Yeah, I think there's maybe two things I would say. And the first one is maybe not something that is possible for everyone. There's this idea of how do we prove the value? How do we go from saying that we need to reduce costs to saying that we actually need to generate value by bringing on people to analyze this data and generate the insights? So if we start from the cost reduction side of things, because very often, as you said, that's what's required, that's what's asked. I think there are a lot of concrete improvements that I'm not an expert in necessarily. My background is not in contact center operations, but in analyzing the voice of consumer data, like the number of calls that we get, for example, I think that there are some clear wins that usually appear. And it's usually simple things, but it can take diving into data beyond that of the contact center. So maybe an example, you were mentioning the idea of the contact center agents being kind of sales agents in a way, helping with these pre-purchase questions that we get from our consumers. And what we've found is that by simply looking at the data of the calls that are coming in, it doesn't really address anything. Like, you can answer them better, you can train the agents on how to sell these products and so on. But ultimately, the idea would be to prevent the calls in the first place. And that requires going a bit beyond the scope of what is traditionally consumer care. And what I mean specifically is, for example, looking at the marketing product pages on Amazon, for example, of the products that are receiving the most calls and figuring out, are we missing some key FAQs? Like, what are the top 10 questions we get about the top 10 products? Are those questions on the FAQ page on Amazon or on my own brand website, whatever it may be? Or are the images answering these kinds of questions? How many people can this air fryer feed? Or is it good for a family? Or is it connected? Are these things clear? These are just some sort of random examples, but are these kinds of things clear? And I think very often the case, we know, or contact center managers know, if you ask them, what product are you called about the most and what question is it? It's probably something that is not hugely complicated, but is it addressed in a way to the consumer that it's immediately obvious they don't need to call? So that can be a way of kind of reducing costs without making it about the contact center itself, but rather about looking at the broader scope of things. And I view that as a kind of voice of customer analysis. And then the other thing that I would say is, when it comes to how do you get people on board with this? How do you show them that it can generate value and that it can scale? And how do you convince people to provide additional resources to contribute to things like this in a dedicated manner? Is effectively do it yourself as a starting point, or get it done somehow that doesn't rely on anyone else. Because I think that's one of the biggest things in change management and transformations, is getting people to go along with your message, to be excited about the same things that you're excited about. And very often that doesn't happen until you show someone the value concretely for their own life, for their own job. So what we do a lot is, of course, try to enable, we try to make tooling that is universal and democratize the data as much as possible, train others on how they can get these kinds of analytics, insights, access the voice of customer data. But ultimately, the way that we always start is by saying, hey, did you know this is something that you could do and it could improve the experience of your customers? This is something that could improve the next generation of your product. It's based on these different data sources that we've collected and this analysis that we've done. Do you find this interesting? Is this helpful for you? And very
Right.
often it is helpful for them and they want to know more and they want to have us do that analysis again for them in the next quarter. And that's when we start to say, well, we only have so many people. We would love to do more for you, but we've enabled this data for you. You can do the analytics yourself in this way. And of course, we're happy to support and help where we can. So those are the two things I would say. You can reduce costs with some things that kind of help go beyond the scope of consumer care. And then ultimately, to show the value, it's really up to us, I think, in consumer care to do things like that, or whoever may be passionate about voice of customer insights. You need to generate them yourself and show the value. Unfortunately, there's no kind of magic answer beyond that, I would say.